Thank you, Haker. And good evening. We're in the last lap of this very stimulating and demanding experience. And I'd like to share with you some of the insights that I think have emerged with greater clarity from this conference. To my own mind, I participated in the previous 8 events on this theme and many others. This is not meant to be an official summary of the conference. It is the task of each of us to analyze and synthesize what we've heard with what we already know and believe, and come out with our own understanding. But we thought it would be helpful to try to tie together some of the issues that we've discussed, because it covers such a broad area, apparently diverse in many cases, apparently unconnected with one another, but I think in fact highly connected. And we would also invite you to share your insights through email, send them so that we can publish them on the web and perhaps other places, about the most important insights you've gotten, most important ideas you have, and also the most important questions that you think need to be answered as we go forward. But first, before I do that, the word spirituality has kept appearing in each of the sessions. It does not appear on the agenda at all. It was not the topic of any of the sessions. Many speakers, many participants have raised this term. So I thought I'd like to start with a story based on true events that took place some 500 or 600 years ago in South India. It's the story of a very prosperous, powerful king who himself was a spiritual person and decided, after a very successful reign as monarch of what we would call now a small kingdom, but at the time it was not, decided that he wanted to dedicate the rest of his life to spiritual pursuits. He was worshiping the divine in the form of Lord Krishna of the Bhagavad Gita. And in those days, one of the best ways for a king to express his devotion would be to take his resources to create a temple. And building a temple to the Lord in those days was a very, very big, enormous undertaking. It might take 10 years or more, depending on the size. It would take enormous wealth to support the thousands of laborers and craftsmen, artisans and artists who would work on it. And he began work on the temple, and after many years, when the temple was nearing completion, every day he was spending more and more time in meditation and prayer to Krishna. And his one prayer was that when the temple is completed, that the Lord would come down and appear in the temple and initiate the temple and make it a holy place for him and his people. After months of his intense concentration and prayer and aspiration, one day Lord Krishna appeared to him in a vision, and he made this request, that on such and such a day the temple will be completed. It's an auspicious day, and we'd like to inaugurate it. Would you please come and actually reveal yourself on that day? As Krishna had already revealed himself in vision to the king. And Krishna's response was quite surprising and almost shocking to the king, because Krishna said, "I'm sorry, on that particular day, I'm already engaged in inaugurating another temple in your kingdom." And he told him the location of this temple in a tiny village way on the outskirts, in a very poor area where nobody could imagine a temple being built. And then Krishna smiled and disappeared. And the king was totally perplexed, because who but the monarch of a country could build a temple to Krishna And being a very powerful monarch, how was it possible that anybody could build a temple and he didn't know it? Because this is an activity that took years and years, enormous expense, thousands of people. So he was so perplexed, immediately he called his ministers and courtiers, and they got on their horses and in their chariots, and they started out to this distant village that took about 3 days to reach, in search of this temple that is to be inaugurated. And when he got to this village, a small, poverty, very poor place with no permanent structures or anything, he sent his people everywhere searching for this temple. They couldn't find anything. He finally approached the head man of the village and said, "Where is this temple being built?" And the head man looked at him in a curious way and almost laughed, and he said, "Do you really think that we could build a temple in our village? We hardly have enough to build our own homes." No, Krishna said, the king said, "I know there's a temple here. You must tell me the truth." The headman didn't know what to say, so finally he said, "Look, there's a very wise man who lives nearby to here. If anybody knows the answer to the question, it would be him. So why don't you go seek him?" So the king went to a small hut where there was a poor, wise, saintly yogi living. And when the king entered his hut, the yogi was sitting there in a lotus position with his eyes closed. He opened his eyes. The king sat before him and said, "Explain why he has come." And he said, "Can you please tell me where is this temple that Krishna is building, that is being inaugurated to Krishna?" And the wise man smiled and he said, "Yes, I can tell you." And he pointed to his own heart and he says, "Here." He said, "I'm a very poor man. I have no material possessions. I have no bricks, no artisans, no craftsmen, no laborers to work for me. So for the past 20 years, I have been constructing the temple of my devotion to the Lord Krishna in my heart. And it is to be completed on the very same day as your temple. And Krishna appeared to me and agreed to come and enter my temple when it's completed." The king was bewildered. He was filled with admiration for this man who was so devoted. And after spending some time there, he left a little disheartened still that Krishna was not going to inaugurate his temple. And as he was leaving, it suddenly occurred to him that with all of his egoism and vanity as a rich and powerful man, he thought he was building the temple to Krishna, when the truth of it was, all the time, he was building the temple that this yogi had been constructing inside his own heart for the last few decades. That's the power of vision. And we talk about a new paradigm, but another way to think about this is we're trying to create the vision inside of the world we want to see materialize outside in the future. And that's the creative process. It's not what happens, it's not what we do out here that really has the power. It's what we first of all construct and formulate and create inside. And this process is a process of co-creation, whereby our interactions with one another, we're trying to create, whether it's a temple or a prosperous land of freedom and goodwill and harmony. Everyone can see it their own way. But that's what we're trying to do. We've talked at length, not only in this, but much more in our earlier conferences, about the characteristics of the present paradigm and the reason why we want to build something and create something much better. And we know of its many characteristics. There are three prominent characteristics. The present world we live in is highly interconnected. It's extremely complex, way beyond our capacity to manage it, to conceive it, to monitor it. And it's fraught with increasing levels of uncertainty because of its interactivity, its interconnectedness, and its complexity. And that uncertainty results in increasing instability. And we're looking for a vision that will mitigate, minimize these characteristics, and create the positive offshoots of those, because the positive offshoot of uncertainty is infinite possibility. As long as we're certain about what's coming, it means what's coming is what we already know. It's not a creative process. The very uncertainty can be converted into infinite possibility, and that's what we're trying to explore here in these sessions. Many of the speakers have spoken about the importance of a vision, of a shared vision, and asked the question, what is our vision of the future? As Alberto said, we want a winning narrative that recognizes that we're all interconnected and that we can benefit by that interconnection. Yehudi Kahana said, we should start not from where we are, but start with the vision of where we want to be and work backwards from there to how we're going to get there. One more very short Indian story, because you all, I think you almost all already know it. It's about the 6 blind men and the elephant. 6 blind men all approach an elephant, and each of them starts grasping and trying to feel the reality of a particular part. One grabs the trunk, one the tail, one the tusk, one the front leg, the back leg, the body, or the belly. And they all describe this thing in terms of their own experience, tactile experience, because they can't see it, and come up with very different things. Well, I think it's fair to say that we had plenty of time to explore the elephant of the future of what this new paradigm is and find out many of its parts. Our real challenge is to figure out how they're all connected with one another and what the animal, the full elephant, looks like. And then we can think about how to approach it and how to move from here to there. Some of the foremost characteristics of a new paradigm, I think through this discussion and many others, we're pretty confident that these are essential elements, and they've been repeated as themes throughout this conference and in many other fora. We don't claim to have invented anything. It must be human-centered. And by human-centered, we mean it can't be just growth for its own sake, or technology for its own sake, or more money for its own sake. It can't even be economy for its own sake. It's got to be the use of technology, capital, growth, economy to promote human welfare and human well-being. But a human-centered paradigm also means something else. It doesn't just define the goal, it also defines the primary driving force. And we've been reiterating that over and over. Many of you have reflected in your comments that the principal driving force for movement to a new paradigm is not technology, it's not growth, it's human beings. And it is the shifting the focus to make the human being not only the primary goal and beneficiary, but recognize that we are the creative force that's going to do it. It's our awareness, aspiration, capacities, and creativity that are going to do it. These are implicit in the idea of a human-centered paradigm. Of course, we all agree that it's got to be sustainable, maintainable and sustainable, not just for us, but for future generations. It's got to be inclusive, not just of us, not just of all humanity today, but of future generations. It's got to be value-based. Whether we call it spirituality or ethics or morality or whatever words you choose to do, which means the goal is not merely or primarily any particular physical objective or consumption. It is realization of high values in human life, whether they're values of freedom and equality and tolerance and harmony, or creativity and innovation, human welfare, human well-being. In his opening remarks, Mr. Tokayev presented 10-point or principles that I think very adequately described some of the main configurations that we are looking for. And what we've been trying to do is look at how all of these things are interconnected with one another. We had very interesting discussion of deep drivers. Tibor Goff used a phrase this morning which I like very much. He referred to them as force multipliers. There are certain factors that not only impact on our existence, but they have the capacity to multiply the impact of everything else with which they're related. And we discussed a number of deep drivers that are force multipliers. I would like to mention 4 of them. And these 4 are not only interrelated with all the aspects of our society today, they're interrelated with one another. And I think this is very important when we come to the issue of how are we going to get there. When we look at these force multipliers or deep drivers, we'll realize, I think we'll recognize, as the discussion this morning reflected, there are many things we know we can do and should do to enhance the power and effectiveness of these. We are not without instruments. We're not without capabilities. We just, first of all, have to know exactly where we want to go, and then to know the instruments we have available and leverage them. The first of these, education, and we've had a long, very rich discussion. I say long, but actually if it had been a 3-day discussion, I still would have thought it's short, because education is so central. Heitor started the conference 2 days ago and then it was repeated by Alberto today. He said education is the instrument of conscious social evolution. And that's really what we're here for. A new paradigm is an attempt for conscious social evolution, and education's the most powerful instrument that we know of to bring that about in the direction that we choose, not what happens by itself. We decide where we want to go, and we foster the education to get us there. Education, as the rector mentioned this morning, enhances freedom of choice. And one of the principal characteristics of a new paradigm is we want to increase the freedom of choice of every human being, because that's what well-being is all about. Our capacity to choose and express our capacities and realize our own aspirations. But education is also the key to population control, it was mentioned today, to technological innovation, to effective democracy and active citizenship, to the rising aspirations, which really provides the energy for social change and paradigm change, for employment, for global citizenship, for ecological awareness, for dispelling the myths and superstitions and willful blindness that obstruct change. So the quality, content, method, and relevance of education are paramount for a new paradigm. And what you are doing here in the university as students and faculty, as educators, is of paramount importance. Everything you do is either a move to reinforce the existing paradigm or a move towards something new. You have the opportunity to change things, as Chandana was giving examples from India, in the classroom, in your own experience, to reinvent education for the future, for the new paradigm. Education, many things, I'm not going to repeat the rich discussion we had, but we did emphasize, Alberto emphasized, the shift from passive to active learning, from knowledge transmission to development of the capacities of students for independent thinking, and also the capacity of ourselves and faculty for independent thinking, a shift from training the mind to developing the whole personality. And that's why we started the World University Consortium, and I'm so pleased to have COSNU as a partner in this activity, and we look forward to many other opportunities to work with you on evolving the means for a new paradigm in education. The need for a new paradigm, education in its widest sense, of course, is not limited to the university, it's not limited to secondary and primary, it's not limited to the formal educational system at all. Bob Berg made the comment this morning that, and many have mentioned, it should be lifelong education, but education includes the role of the media, public officials, public awareness, the work of NGOs. So education in the widest sense is something in which WAS is involved, and all of us can be involved. This is a force multiplier, and I think it's clear to us that we're not using this force effectively. Rather, put it positively, we can multiply the effectiveness of this force multiplier 10 or even 100-fold, and we won't exhaust the possibilities of education. We're just scratching the surface because we're learning the technology. Just like we're learning nanotechnology and other things, this is the most complex activity that we undertake, is trying to become more conscious and communicate that to other people. We're just scratching the surface. It's exciting, it's potential, the power is there with us. The second of these force multipliers we've been discussing, we had a discussion on it yesterday morning, or the night before, first night, freedom and human rights, which happen to also be essential for real and effective education, because it's only in an atmosphere of freedom where you can really create effective education that stimulates and develops independent thinking. Freedom is not just a moral imperative. Equally important, it's a deep driver for change in everything that we talked about if we want to move towards a new paradigm. And it's not just a question of giving rights, it's a question of empowering people to make the world better. We have achieved a lot, we have a lot more to do. Freedom is the essential condition for independent thinking, innovation, and creativity. And of course, freedom is linked to democracy. And you can't have democracy without freedom and rights. Is the tyranny of an elite. Democracy ruled by money is only plutocracy. It's only when democracy is matched with the liberal values of human rights that we really have something worth striving for. The third force multiplier, which has been referred to by a number of participants, is our growing interconnectivity. All of our human relationships, everything we have created in civilization and technology and culture has been in prosperity, has been the result of increasing interactions and interrelationships between people. There's no wealth, there's no security, there's no knowledge growth that doesn't involve increasing intensity and reach and scope of interaction between people. And now that the opportunities for that interaction have been multiplied enormously, we have to learn how to fully utilize that interconnectivity for mass collaboration, massive interactive knowledge sharing, massive multi-stakeholder collaboration, and these were 3 points made by Tibor Toth this morning, at the national, local level, and the international level as well. And the fourth force multiplier that I'd like to mention is the rising aspirations themselves, which is the result of all the other 3, but is the real driver. We may get an awareness, but what we do in action depends on what we aspire for. And part of this exercise is not just an exercise in science, it's an exercise in asking ourselves, what are we here for? What are we living for? What is humanity for? What do we aspire for in the future? And therefore, if this exercise, even if it doesn't give us clarity, if it raises the bar on our aspirations, it's taking a very important step forward. Rising aspirations are fueled in turn by rising levels of education, rising greater social development, greater freedom and human rights. So these are all interactive forces. We have to figure out the technology, the social technology, how do we leverage them and multiply them and apply them to maximum advantage? It's an invisible, intangible power, but I have seen for a long time, the most powerful powers are the ones that you can't see and you can't touch, but they can change everything. We're looking for force multipliers for a radical paradigm change, the way the French Revolution was a paradigm change, or the end of slavery in America, or the end of colonialism in Asia, or the fall of the Berlin Wall. We're looking at something of that or greater magnitude. Aspiration is the driving force. We talked about different forms of capital. And the purpose of that exercise was to look in the cupboard and see what are the resources we have available. And one of the ideas that emerged from this discussion was, right up until now, our development strategy has focused primarily on overexploitation of natural capital and the limited focus concentration on economic capital. Whereas the real driving force for a new paradigm is going to be fully developing social capital and human capital. Why? Because they're essentially unlimited in potential. We cannot exhaust our potential as human beings. We cannot exhaust our potential for collaboration. So I think the discussion has helped clarify that. We've discussed opportunities and challenges. A number of opportunities that are emerging today. Bob Berg mentioned the fact that we live in a much more peaceful world. That is, the actual number of casualties from war has come down by 90% or more in the last 20 years. And there are many others we've discussed. We also are faced with increasing challenges, ominous challenges. History tells us that all our greatest advances seem to have come in response to challenges. That doesn't mean that's necessary or necessarily the best way to learn, but that seems to be the way we learn. When things get really challenging, then we have the incentives to change, break our habits, move out of our inertia, give up our outmoded ideas, and try something new. So, up until now, we've needed challenges. The challenge for us is to convert those challenges into opportunities. The challenges are inevitable. The question is, can we leverage the force of those challenges and convert it into an impetus for change? We had a very interesting discussion this morning, rich discussion this morning, about the role of institutions and the reform of institutions. And this is going to be a major topic at the next conference. We were just scratching the surface here. But some interesting, I think, important insights arose from some of the comments of participants. One of them, a story that Diego Pinto reported when he was introducing his organization yesterday morning. He talked about a meeting of 700 people in 1948 to envision, who shared a vision of an interconnected, cooperative Europe. And we see the results of that vision some 65 years later. New institutions arise out of new visions, and therefore, if we're looking for a new paradigm, our new vision, once we're clear about what it is, it should give birth and impetus to the evolution of those institutions. I think we missed a great opportunity at the end of the Cold War, but we have enough incentive today to learn from our mistakes and move forward. We also had a session, I'm going to wrap up in another couple of minutes. We also had a session this afternoon, or this morning, on the need for new theory, actually 2 sessions on the need for new theory in economics, and some very rich, important discussion. This has been an ongoing discussion in the Academy and the Club of Rome and in collaboration with other organizations. The founding father of modern management, Peter Drucker, once said, "There is nothing as powerful as a good theory." Don't underestimate the importance of theoretical clarity and theoretical coherence. I'm very pleased. I think we've made some good headway here, and we're working with Club of Rome in an ongoing effort to develop this. And our ultimate target is to introduce new courses into the educational system, and we would be delighted to collaborate with you on that exercise. So we have levers for a new paradigm. I'm not covering them exhaustively, but I'm trying to say we have things to work with if we're clear about where we want to go. And finally, there was one important topic mentioned by a number of the speakers. I think it's probably mentioned at almost every conference talking about the future and a better how do we get there, and that is the importance of leadership. At the level of the individual, we believe that better leadership requires individuals who have independence of thinking, who don't feel the pressure to conform, and have the courage to think differently than others. Bob Berg mentioned that I pointed out we're not just talking about political leaders, we're not just talking about business leaders, social entrepreneurs have a tremendous role to play in this as well. And of course, we definitely need leaders in education to a new paradigm. But it's not just individuals that can lead the world. The motto of the World Academy is leadership in thought that leads to action. Ideas have the power to change the world, and what we're working for here, looking for here, and trying to collaborate with you and others on is, what are those disruptive ideas that will lead us out of the present morass and obstacles and resistances to that better future? And we also need and can play a role, and shouldn't underestimate the role that institutions can play as leaders in society. Peter mentioned his dream in his opening remarks of creating an umbrella group of like-minded organizations that would work together to provide that leadership, if not at the ground level or at the grassroots level, at least at the conceptual level, the intellectual level, but why not at all the levels? Why not build that consortium, that concept, until it includes those that act at all these levels? These are some of the things I'm taking home from the conference. I want to thank all of you, all of those who came from overseas, and all of those who participated locally for making this a very rich experience. Thank you.